The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, and welcome to today's webinar, Conducting Effective Workplace Investigations, presented by our sponsor, Heffernan. We're so happy you can join us. My name is Deb Beto, and I will be your moderator today and be monitoring questions you may have during the session. Before we open up the session, let's review a couple of key items. All of the webinar materials we discuss can be found at the URL currently showing on your screen. I will be sharing this URL in a follow-up email, so don't feel like you need to write it down right now. If you have trouble with your internet connection during the webinar, we recommend leaving the presentation and logging back in. If you have audio difficulties or a telephone line goes dead during the call, hang up and call back again to the same number. If all lines go dead, watch the on-screen chat box for an alternative call-in number. Please feel free to ask questions or provide feedback by using the chat box or questions box during the webinar. If you are using a tablet, you may need to tap on the screen for the options bar to appear, and then you can select the appropriate option. We may not respond immediately, but we will work your questions or feedback into the presentation. If we can't get to your comment or question during the session, we will be online afterwards to respond, or we may follow up in an email if we run completely out of time. You may also email us at moderator@aspenrmg.com for up to 48 hours after the webinar. This will be a 1-hour presentation. Questions and comments are very much encouraged throughout, and the presenters will be answering questions at the end. And lastly, we have a number of webinars upcoming covering a variety of topics, including those listed at the Heffernan webinar website. In addition, we offer the mandatory Preventing Harassment training in English 3 times a year. With that, let's begin today's webinar, Conducting an Effective Workplace Investigation. Today's interactive session will be facilitated by CJ Westrick. CJ Westrick is an SPHR and has been in human resources management for over 25 years and received her Senior Professional in Human Resources National Certification in 2002. She started HR Jungle in 2006 and targets companies that want senior-level HR expertise on a part-time basis. HR Jungle provides business owners and management teams workable solutions and hands-on assistance with employees and legal compliance through outsourced HR services. Welcome, CJ. We're looking forward to your presentation today.
Thanks so much, Deb. So can everybody hear me all right? Hopefully. Welcome. I appreciate everyone coming to the, being part of the webinar. I know it's a different world out there for us right now, so it's a little hard to focus on something else, but I, for one, am glad to do something besides talk about COVID-19. So today we're going to be looking at the benefits of an effective investigation, the different types of complaints you might receive, and then 10 steps to conducting that successful investigation. And as soon as I figure out how to change a slide here, okay, once my mouse, we're going to jump right into our first polling question.
All right. So our first polling question: how many workplace investigations have you been involved with? It's either going to be none, 1 to 5, or more than 5. And we've got people voting very rapidly today, so that's great news. We encourage all of you to stay active participants of the meeting by participating in the polling questions. So CJ, right now we say 10% say none, 35% say 1 to 5, and 55% say more than 5.
Okay, so we've got a mixed bag out there as far as who's had some experience. And the benefits of a good, an effective investigation is multifold. You're determining what happened. You're also dealing with problems early. You're enforcing the company policies and encouraging reporting, protecting your company from lawsuits, avoiding or countering bad publicity. This is particularly important if you're a public company because that bad publicity gets out there really quickly these days. and to build employee trust. So there's two types of complaints. One is the formal complaint. So in this manner, someone has come to you or whoever the proper person is to file a complaint, and they might provide it verbally or in writing. Some states won't let you just require the employee to put it in writing. They actually say the employee needs to be able to do it verbally or in writing. And but you need a process. So hopefully you have a complaint procedure, that you have a sexual harassment, or not a sexual harassment, but a investigative, so some kind of harassment, because that's what the complaints are typically going to be about. And so you've got either a form that they can, fill out, or somebody to listen to them who then does it right, writes it out for them. And but it can intimidate someone to have to put it in writing, because a lot of times they feel intimidated even making the complaint. But it is crucial that you make them comfortable, because that is really key to being able to eliminate the problem very quickly without it becoming something major, or at least legal, to where they could take it to court. And a lot of times the employee may be uncomfortable and doesn't really know what to call what they're complaining about. And that's going to be up to the person doing the investigation to put a label on it, basically. Is it sexual harassment? Is it, quid pro quo, sexual harassment? Is it just harassment based on other kinds of things? Hold on just a second. Sorry, my phone is doing something weird here. Sorry, I'm using an earpiece that my phone seems to want to interrupt all the time. And so you need to kind of know what that procedure is when you get a formal complaint, because that's what they're going to be expecting. They like to see that you're not flubbing around and trying to figure out how to deal with it. Then the other kind of complaint or complaints that you'll get is you've got the typical off the record. And this is where somebody comes to someone in a supervisory position and kind of says, I don't want you to do anything about this, but this has been happening. And so it's still a requirement to investigate, and you still need to deal with it. So you have to, the person that's in the supervisory position that might have heard this needs to know how to deal with it. And that comes through training from the company. Then you've got the anonymous. I don't actually see a lot of anonymous ones, but it's the unsigned note, left. There's a phone call. I've even gotten calls from an employee's spouse, and, about a problem because the employee isn't willing to come forward. And so it comes in a lot of different directions when that happens. And then you've got the reports by the managers and supervisors. They are the company's eyes and ears. And, and when I do any kind of supervisory training, I remind them of that. That's part of their job, is to pay attention to the rumors, to the gossip, to, the grapevine going through the company, because, it's kind of like, where there's smoke, there may be fire that needs to be put out. And so it is important that you recognize that it comes in different directions. So when we talk about other types, or specific, you've got the indirect complaints. Sometimes this happens during a disciplinary discussion where somebody goes into defensive mode, and so they tell you all the other things that are wrong with the company. It's not them, it's you. And you've got the departing employees. I have had several times where someone during a termination meeting is talking about, whether it's a resignation or, you're firing them, that they are talking about all the problems that they've seen at the company, and, they're glad to be gone. So, you get that kind of thing. You've got the workplace observation, and it can't be overlooked. And this is kind of a lot where your managers and supervisors come in, is to be able to report things that they've seen and heard. And then the third-party reports that does come from a customer, a vendor, a friend, or a family member that contacts you. So there's a lot of different ways that you might hear of things that need to be investigated. And I think the most important thing is to remember you can't just blow it off. You really do have to investigate and determine whether or not something needs to be done. We have a sample case for you. And this one is, I'm going to read it, even though you can read it yourself too. James, I'm not even going to try his last name. So James is a former IBM VP. He was awarded $3.7 million in 2014 after a Connecticut jury decided that 61-year-old employee was wrongfully terminated because of his age. Now, before and after the trial, the U.S. magistrate harshly criticized IBM's internal handling of an age discrimination complaint that he had taken to HR before he was terminated. And while the HR investigator had concluded the executive was treated fairly, the judge said the HR report was one-sided and blocked IBM from submitting it as evidence at trial. Specifically, he noted the HR report failed to include evidence favorable to the employee, including his performance reviews. The judge wrote he suspected the purpose of the investigation was more to exonerate IBM than to determine if the employee was treated fairly. And this is a real case. And so, it really shows that the judges, if you've got something that goes as far as a courtroom, the judges are going to look to make sure that that employee was treated fairly, that they used all the resources they had available, that the investigation, if you did one, was something that, it was not one-sided, because that was one of the biggest problems they had. That was one-sided. It didn't, give equal weight to one side or the other. And so, it really does demonstrate that being prompt and starting to do an investigation, the thoroughness, impartiality, makes a huge difference in the outcome of a case. And that's the part you have to remember. I've talked with CEOs before where I was called in to help somebody, and I get the CEO on the line, and the first thing he says is, "That boy didn't do it." And it's like, okay, how do you know that? Because he told me. And if you're an investigator, you hear some of that stuff, and you have to be able to slice through it to figure out what the real truth is, and figure out who, where it all comes together. So the 10 steps to a successful investigation are to determine the issues to investigate, to take immediate action if necessary. Sometimes it's necessary to put someone out on a paid suspension because they're working closely together and you can't really do a proper investigation if they're kind of scowling at each other the whole time you're trying to get through this. To appoint the right investigator. To plan the investigation. You don't just jump into these things. Conduct fair interviews. You gather all the documents and evidence you might have available. You evaluate that evidence, and then you take action, and you document the investigation, and you do a follow-up. So those are the 10 steps we're going to walk through right now. So the first one, determine the issues to investigate. And this is important because, like I said, employees don't always have the legal name for whatever is the problem. If there isn't, if I can't even talk, if there even is a legal name for it. So you need to, figure out what is the seriousness of the misconduct. Was it illegal, or is it a potential lawsuit? Are they a whistleblower? Because there's a lot of protection for whistleblowers out there, both on a federal and often state level. Is it a violation of company policy? Do you have a non-harassment policy? Do you have a code of business and, business ethics? Is there a non-retaliation policy associated with any kind of complaints? And is there a dispute over what happened? Are there two different sides to this? And has there been similar complaints, and how have they been handled? Remember, the sides, it's like a lot of times I find people want to brush off an investigation because they believe it wasn't any big deal, whatever the misconduct was. But it's not that, you can't really make that decision without the investigation. Not every investigation leads to terminations. It may be something small that you can just nip it in the bud as it happened. Maybe somebody who's saying something or starting to act like a bully, or, doing something that is just inappropriate in the workplace. And you can, bring it down to, an inappropriate conversation rather than, a big harassment kind of thing or something like that. So you really need to be able to scale the investigation based on the size of it. If this is a potential lawsuit, you want a pretty deep investigation so that you've got everybody's story on this to know which way it's going to go. And so my mouse, okay, there we go. Then you need to take immediate action. And so the immediate action, there's a difference between immediate and prompt. Immediate is if there's a problem that you can do something to separate the people if necessary. So you're looking to protect people. Otherwise, prompt is usually good enough as far as you're working on it. You're not ready to start the investigation yet. But the immediate stuff is to protect the employees and protect the company. Is there a reason to have a paid suspension or other paid time off for the complaining employee to get them out of there and to avoid retaliation? You know, can a transfer happen? And a transfer, you want to be very careful, because if you transfer the complaining employee, in some states that's going to get you into trouble. So you need to kind of figure out what you can do with this employee, if you need to separate them from whoever they're complaining about. But you be very careful that it isn't perceived as retaliation, because even a paid suspension can make the person feel like they're being retaliated against. So that's why you want to be very careful. Often if you're going to go through one of these steps or feel a need to protect someone, talk with an attorney, find out what legally, and if possible, an employment law attorney, because a business attorney will not necessarily know the right thing to do. I have actually, this one about the boy said he didn't do it. That case came back to me because I found out they had chosen to listen to their business attorney, who did pretty much everything wrong, and which is why I ended up with it back in my lap. And it wasn't even for a client; it was for a client's like sister company. And so they had asked me to get involved. But you have to be careful with that stuff. Make sure that if you're talking to an attorney that they actually know employment law for your state or even the federal law. A lot of them will think that they do, but when it comes to some of this stuff, it really helps to get somebody who specializes in this type of thing. Let's move to our next polling question, Deb.
All right, we've got it. So some things to consider when choosing an investigator include, and your choices are gender, impartial, capable of testifying, or all of the above. And while you're answering that question, I'd just like to remind you that we do encourage questions of your own throughout this process. So please feel free to use the questions box or the chat box if you have any questions or comments that you'd like to bring up along the way. So we only have about 60% of the people voting. We have got 26 attendees today. So just so you can get an idea when I announce the percentages, how that relates to the audience. And right now, CJ, we have 0% saying gender, 22% say impartial, 6% say capable of testifying, and the rest say...
You've got... That's question 3. What was the polling question that you used? We can
Some things to consider when choosing an investigator.
Okay. All right. Sorry. Okay. Go ahead then.
So it's either, we've got 0 say gender, 26% say impartial, 5% say capable of testifying, and 68% say all of the above.
Okay. So in that case, it is all of the above. Everything does make a difference. And so it kind of just depends on the situation. So when looking for the right investigator, they need to be experienced. They really need to be perceived as impartial. And because a lot of times, if you are like the HR manager or director in your company, you may not be perceived as being impartial. Because I've heard that when I worked inside, I'd hear that, oh, you work for the company, so how can I believe, it will be impartial? And so sometimes it really does pay to have an outside investigator come in and do the investigation. You're looking for someone who is a subject matter expert. What is the reason for the investigation? If someone knows how to do discrimination investigating or even about discrimination law, doesn't mean they know a thing about fraud. So you want to take a look at that and figure out whether or not they want that. Are they capable of taking action? Now, I don't know that most investigators aren't necessarily supposed to be taking action, but they often are asked for a recommendation. And by, mostly the investigators doing the fact finding. But they need to know what kind of options there might be available for whatever the results are. How good are their interviewing skills? I'm in California, and California law says they're very specific about who can investigate. It either has to be an employee, and ironically, they don't even say it has to be a well-trained employee, but it can be an attorney, or it can be a private investigator. And the private investigator, you might question that, but frankly, that their whole thing is about interviewing skills. So, and a lot of times they, know what they're doing with that. Gender can make a difference depending on what the situation is. Gender might make a difference if you've got a case where a woman is trying to talk about an attack. It's just like when the police, they'll have a female police officer come in on rape cases, things like that, because it might be easier for that person to talk to, to someone of a certain gender. So it does make a difference that they're capable of testifying so that they can actually speak well of what their findings were and things like that. Because if it goes to court, they will absolutely be required to testify. And, it's a team approach. Sometimes it may be where someone asks the question, someone else is taking notes. However, when you do the team approach, it can be more intimidating. Just like when you're doing interviewing for hiring and you put a group of your people in the room and they're all staring at this one person that's the candidate. And a lot of times they get very nervous. They're very intimidated. So most of the time, the team approach doesn't really work out as well as you might want it to. Also, it needs to be an impartial person whenever possible. So that's why we go back into a labor attorney, an HR professional. And, even though you might have someone inside that's HR, again, you have to look to see whether or not they truly could be impartial, or will they be subject to a VP or even the CEO's push to go in favor of the company. And like I said, private investigator, trained management personnel can do that. You want somebody who knows what they're doing. That's really what it comes down to. And, when you look under investigator in the California laws, it says that, that they're very specific on who. I'm an HR consultant and I cannot do an investigation on my own. If I'm asked to do one, I actually have to go through a law firm because they're licensed to do it. I can act on their behalf. I just can't do it on my own. So in your state, or even the federal law, look and see what is required. And are there, some very specific options like there is in California? And look and see. And then, always, whoever you're choosing, ask, yourself, how will others perceive that person? In all the different things you looked at in choosing them, what is going to be the perception of who you chose? And I will say most of the time, employees feel it was fairer when it's an outside person. And because if they're complaining about something, they'll kind of tie in everybody that works at the company into that complaint. And so it makes them feel like they're not getting a fair shot if it's someone from inside. So just keep that in mind. Then you need to plan the investigation. You're going to review everything that you know, and you're going to find out, figure out what do you need to still find out. Who has that information? So who are the witnesses or other people that might be involved, and how best to get that? Who do you ask? What order, what orders, what sequence do you follow? Because it does make a difference. What questions you want to ask, and and to inform the employee's manager that you are doing an investigation. You keep in mind that investigations are on a need-to-know basis. So you don't give other people all the details. You bring it down and really tighten up your questions and things like that. And so you also are looking at where you're going to conduct these interviews. Do you have a private office you can go into where not ever, you don't have half the company walking by looking in the window? What is the setup of the meeting? Is it going to be more comfortable being across a desk, or maybe two chairs kind of facing each other? You have to anticipate the worst case scenarios. And you have to really avoid the tendency to make assurances. Oh, we'll make sure we take care of it. We'll make sure you feel comfortable. You don't know until you've done the investigation just what you can do. So you just have to kind of say, we're going to investigate. We will let you know, what we can as we are able to. And you have to keep it really locked down tight. You have to come up with what those questions are. You want a list of questions when you start this, because you need to be able to go through it yourself, not really showing a lot of emotion, because you're going to get responses. They're going to be angry or upset. They could be crying, and you need to be able to deal with that. And you have to be able to empathize without taking sides. So you have to be objective. even though you're still having to be sensitive for what they're going through in order to get everything from them that you need for information. And get advice, talk to other people, talk to upper management, talk to your attorney, talk to an outside consultant, or even if you've got, a PR person, talk with them about how this comes together. But, to look at it, because it can be very hard to control once you've started. So you really need to have a detailed plan of what you're doing. And you need to go into it with a very open mind. You can't make assumptions, just like that CEO I mentioned. Oh, the boy didn't do it. It's like, okay, he took that person's word for it, had never even spoken with the woman who made the complaint. And so, that's like a classic example of not keeping an open mind. So you don't judge. You really have to remain, objective. You have to be able to keep a straight face so that they're not thinking that, you're being shocked by what they told you, or that you're believing what they're telling you and won't believe somebody else. So you really have to go into it very open-minded. And when you're developing questions, you don't ask leading questions. You don't say, did Maria falsify her time card? It's, more the point would be, do you know of anyone who might be falsifying time cards? You don't put names on it. It's like, if you've ever watched any of the legal shows that are on TV and they go into court, you learn a lot about how to ask questions watching that kind of thing, because they'll get called on making a leading statement because you're giving that person the information they may not have had. So you're not looking for them to confirm something because you've told them it. You need to get their information. You're trying to pull out what they know. How do you know people, it's like, maybe just say, how do you know people are putting the proper time on their time cards? Or do you see other people ever clocking in and you see them using a different time card? Things like that. You're looking for the broader picture. Maybe Maria's name wouldn't even come up and it'd be somebody else, which just widened your investigation. So that's why you want to make sure that you're not asking questions that give information. You're looking to receive the information. And yes, I could have put this little purse up there, or did you talk to Maria and discuss your time card last week? It kind of depends on what the person you're talking with what kind of relationship they have with Maria to know whether or not some questions will work, some won't. And now, since I have number 3, what do you have for number 3, Deb?
So I just saw that the questions from last year were reversed from this year, so that's why. My apologies. So we'll get on to what should have been question number 2 here, and we're going to go on to, here you go. When conducting an interview, what should you do? Should you make a quick judgment call? Should you start the interview with difficult questions? Should you keep your opinions to yourself, or all of the above? And we are still accepting questions. And I think all of you should get this right since we've already reviewed this material. So we're still waiting for a few more people to answer. Again, we're going to wait until we've got a good number of people answering, because we want to make sure that people are staying engaged in the presentation and actively participating. So CJ, we have 0% say make a quick judgment call, 0% say start the interview with difficult questions, 89% say keep your opinions to yourself, and 11% say all of the above.
All right, well, in that case, it is C, you keep your opinions to yourself. Remember, an investigation is a fact-finding mission. You're not making decisions on the go. You're actually wanting to gather everything. So take a look at that and keep that in mind. So when you're conducting FAIR interviews, you're talking with the victim, the accused, witnesses, and looking at all that and trying to balance some of that. And then you also you want to be prepared, and this is something that you go into the interview with written down, a brief explanation of the situation. You don't give the whole story or whatever, who said, she said, stuff like that. You're just talking about, the allegations. There has been an allegation that somebody has harassed Maria, or we've gotten an allegation that someone has submitted a fraudulent time card, and that's what we're investigating. So take a look at that. You know, you thank the person for their time and cooperation. You're going into it very friendly. You're trying to relax them during this initial stage. You know, you explain why they've been interviewed as opposed to other people. And you don't list the people who are being interviewed. You're just going to say you were, you know, we were given your name as a possible witness or somebody who might have some information about this. You're emphasizing the need for truthfulness because no investigation is going to come out fair if people are fudging the truth or trying to cover for someone. So you need to kind of make sure you realize, you know, you get it across that you're really looking for the truth. Whatever that goes against, whether it's against the company, against individuals, such, you know, things like that. And you explain that you will not come to any conclusions, you know, until the investigation is complete, because it's all just a bunch of notes until it's all done. And then you can explain the process. You know, I talk originally with people and, you know, we actually decided who to speak with. We planned it out, you know, we're going to be talking to people and, you know, kind of walk them through what the steps are so they know what's coming. And because I guarantee you, the moment that person leaves the room, they will go and talk to everybody else that they think might have something to do with it and explain it. So everybody else, after the first person, kind of comes in with a heads up and may have already created their own story in their mind, and you're trying to get past that. So one of the things you could say is something like, I've been asked to investigate a complaint that involves you. The company is required by law to investigate all such complaints. These are simply allegations, and no one has made any judgments about the allegation or your conduct. As part of the company's confidential investigation, I want to obtain your responses before the company makes any judgments. Your truthfulness and cooperation are imperative. So that might be a little bit more formal than you want, but that's kind of what you're going for. You want them to, you know, understand where you're coming from as an investigator or, you know, whoever's doing the investigation. And you need to make sure everybody that's on the interview list is told there will be no retaliation, because retaliation violates your company policy and the law, and you need to tell them that, and that they should let you know or report it in whatever way is, you know, that you need to, that they need to report any retaliation they experience. And I know a lot of the courts have expanded that retaliation protection, that any witnesses, you know, because I've heard of cases where the person who made the complaint they felt that person was protected, but then they did something, you know, negative toward one of the witnesses. And so the retaliation covers everybody involved in the investigation. And keep that in mind and make sure they understand that if they feel anything negative that's happened while the investigation is going on, they need to report it. And as I mentioned, you're keeping the interviews and the whole process as confidential as possible. You just tell the witness the necessary facts. You caution them that the interview is confidential, at least as much as possible. You know they're going to talk anyhow. If you have one, you know, you have them review and sign your company's confidentiality agreement, or if they've already signed one, make them understand that it still holds through this, that they aren't to talk with outside people about this. Let them know that revealing details about the investigation can be cause for disciplinary action. And I think the bigger message from my side is to, you know, make sure they know who they can speak with. So they have questions, or at least going to somebody who they can talk with, but to also remind them that it's not going to end up being a fair investigation if everybody's got their own preconceived notions on hearing each person's story, because it will change with each person. You know, and you need to set a good example if you're the investigator by not talking about this and being careful of what you say. You can't say, oh, well, you know, Sam told me this. It's like, well, that may be one of the questions if you're talking to the person who was accused, but, you know, you need to be careful. And that's why it's important to have this thing planned out ahead of time. and to make sure the interviews are in a private place where they do feel it's a confidential environment. If necessary, if you've got conference rooms that are like big windows everybody walks by all the time, because often those conference rooms are in the middle of the company, ask somebody who's got more of a private office somewhere if they'll give up their office while, that can be used for the investigations. Because if the person doesn't feel comfortable that they're not being stared at through the windows by somebody, they're going to be able to, they'll feel freer to talk. And keep in mind, even the National Labor Relations Act has some broad confidentiality requirements. It's like, well, they've got some rules about the requirements, I guess I should say. So you need to be careful. You can't say that no one at all can ever talk about it, because there are protections, of free speech and all that kind of stuff, which is what the National Labor Relations Act talks about, is the free speech concept. So make sure that if you're saying it's confidential, that it's, in a lot of ways, talk with an attorney first for your state and everything like that. But in a lot of ways, it's more of a real request. Please keep it quiet, but to impress upon them why you're asking them to be quiet about it right now, simply because you need people to be able to answer the questions honestly. If they've got some other notion, or if they start overthinking it, maybe things change in what they will be willing to tell you. So it makes a big difference. And then you're also going to start with those easy questions. You're going to put the employee at ease. You're going to assess their body language and demeanor, because sometimes you'll get somebody who comes in and feels almost too casual. And frankly, if they're too casual, they perks me up a bit, because I'm looking at them saying, why are they that comfortable? Because they should be nervous. I mean, everybody is going to be a little nervous in the interview process because they don't know what you're going to ask. If they come across cocky, I'm going to wonder why. Do they feel, that they are above it, something like that? But if it does seem odd, dig a little deeper, and if the employee is more upset, or, than you think they would be for what happened, again, dig a little deeper. I know I had a receptionist one time who spent like an hour just to make the complaint, an hour in my office crying before I could get her to actually speak the words. And it was like so frustrating because I couldn't figure out what was going on. Well, somebody had complimented on how she looked in a red sweater. And the reason it bothered her, though, and her reaction was so over the top, was because she had been literally chased around a desk in a previous job. So she was ultra sensitive to the situation, of anybody commenting on how she looked whatsoever. And, the normal person wouldn't necessarily have been upset. They might not have liked the comment, but they're not going to just completely freak out on you. And so whether it's like over the top or almost too casual, is I think the other side that I see, you have to wonder about that, and you're going to dig a little deeper. Then you always have to be careful of your tone of voice. He said that? It's like, you don't want to show that kind of thing. It doesn't matter if it shocked you. Your opinion doesn't matter. You're making notes. You're trying to, put it all together in a way that the company or their attorney, can read it and understand it without your opinions, without giving off your opinions in a non-spoken way to the people you're interviewing. And, so you want to be very careful about your tone of voice and to look at that. And, so it's like you don't ask the leading questions. Can you confirm that Daryl hit Jeff on the loading dock yesterday? Instead, it's like, things that lead into it. Where did you work yesterday? Oh, the docks. Did you see anything unusual? Well, yeah. What can you tell me what happened? Now, maybe the witness that you called doesn't see and hasn't seen anything. And, if they didn't see it, you can say, did you see an incident between Daryl and Jeff? Maybe it wasn't unusual, and that's why it didn't come up on them. So you kind of lead into it, but, you go softly into it. See if they will volunteer stuff that you don't know from anybody else. Again, you keep the open mind. You don't know until you're done what's going on. Ask each of the witnesses, is there any kind of cooperation?
CJ, we just lost your audio. CJ? CJ, we lost your audio.
In there within a few days, it's easy and stuff. But sometimes these will go back for months when it started and it wasn't reported. So you're trying to kind of like, well, can you lead me through it? You know, what's your earliest memory of this kind of thing happening? You know, approximately when did that happen? Was there anybody around for that one? Can you, give me as close to the conversation that happened or the activities? So kind of look at it and dig into some of that. And then you also have to consider the potential bias of witnesses. If you're asking somebody for witnesses, a lot of times they're looking for the people who will stand up and offer their side of the story. So you have to kind of keep that in mind, that the best friend or even the spouse in the workplace isn't necessarily going to be your best witness. They may be, but you need to pay attention to what that relationship is. So then you have to focus, the biggest thing is you focus on the facts. You have to be objective versus subjective. Where, when did this is like the reporter. Where did it happen? When did it happen? Where were you? Who was present? What happened? Who had similar experiences? You're looking to gather up as much stuff as you can from each of these people to figure out if there's more people you need to talk with, if there's some kind of document that you could find or look for, and you're doing that kind of thing. Then, you need to ask about those other witnesses or evidence. Is there anything that can back this up? Has someone witnessed this happening? Have you received any emails or text messages regarding this? I mean, we've seen even on a large scale political thing that people hold on to evidence if they got it. So you need to ask for it because they may not think to give it to you initially. Oh, I didn't think that was important. Well, it can be, or it may be. And so you want to ask every person you interview, did anyone else see or hear this? Did you tell anyone? Did you take notes? Was there any written communication? Do you have any concerns about continuing to work during this investigation? Because that's when you kind of go in. It's like, well, he's, the person's being really hard on him right now or something like that. You're looking for, immediate retaliation for part of that. But also if there was physical, fear of their own safety. And you're asking about contradictions. Well, you're saying this, but, I heard this happen. This is what I heard over here. Why would I hear a different story from someone else? You're looking for the motivations behind those allegations. Why do you think this person brought that up right now? It's putting all the facts together. And if they don't all match up perfectly, I've done an interview where both the accused, it was a third person who made the accusation. Actually, I've had two of these. A third person who wasn't actually part of this made the accusation. But both the accused and the perceived victim both denied it. And so it's like, okay, it's like you can't do anything if no one's willing to speak about it. And so when the third person brings up, it might be because they mentioned something, somebody mentioned something to somebody else, who knows? But you're trying to figure out, okay, what pulled this together and why are we having this interview? So, then when you're ending the interview, you need to explain to the complaining employee, for their, possible, I've asked, it's like, what would you like to see happen from this? One person told me, I'd like to see, something tattooed on their forehead. Well, that's not going to happen. So what's our next, thing? Because you want to kind of see how their mind is going on this, because a lot of times they may want something much more serious to happen to the accused than the investigation might reveal needs to be done. And, it could be that all the investigation has shown that this person needs to be written up or go through some kind of training, but not termination. And so you kind of need to be able to understand where the employee's mind is at right now and just say, thanks for the input. I don't know what's going to happen at this point. And then, here's what we'll be doing for follow-up. You do want to make sure that you're emphasizing the company will take appropriate action, but not necessarily the action the employee prefers. And, and it's like, and just explain, until the investigation is complete, we don't yet know what would be considered the appropriate action. So when you're doing this, you're going to ask the interviewees to contact you, obviously, because you're setting up the interviews. And, when you're talking with them, you're saying, if you've got any new or additional information that comes to your attention, please contact me. If you start feeling retaliated, please contact me. If you have questions about the investigation, please bring them to me. And if you hear anyone talking about it, I would appreciate knowing about that. Again, you're emphasizing that you're trying to conduct a fair interview, and all of these things matter. And so if you'd please keep me informed of anything you notice out there, I would greatly appreciate it, because it will help me do a more fair investigation. So, Deb, do we have another polling question out there?
We do, CJ, and this is a great refresher, because this is the one we should have done a while ago when I had the wrong one up there. So this will test your memory on how well you retained the information from earlier in the session. So what types of complaints should you investigate? Should you investigate off-the-record complaints, anonymous complaints, reports by managers, or all of the above? And luckily, this is our last question, so I can't mess them up anymore. And we've got about 60% of the people have voted. We're going to wait until a few more have voted so that we can make sure that we've got everybody in there. And since this is the last question, I'm going to encourage you to all use your questions box to answer any questions that you would like CJ to address at the end of the presentation. So if you have any questions, please let us know. We're about up to 70 now, so still quite a few people not really paying attention. That's too bad. All right, so we've got 100% of the people are saying all of the above.
So they did remember.
There you
Some
go.
of them are paying attention. Okay. So, yes, we spent a long time on how to conduct that fair interview or investigation, but it is really, really important. So another step is to gather all those documents and evidence that you've heard about now. You're looking for, and it's even beyond that, you're looking for any relevant policies the company has. Look at the employee handbook. Look at any individual emails that have gone out or memos that have gone out about like a policy that hasn't yet made it to the handbook. You're looking at the work history of the people that usually it's mostly of the accused and the complainant, but it could be the other people because of looking for those biases. So you're looking at the work history. Is this someone who complains a lot about a lot of things? Because that will sometimes take away a little of their credibility. But you're looking at the work history. What kind of prior incidents has anyone been involved in? Are there emails that might have been mentioned about this? And keep in mind, even if someone isn't telling you that there's emails, if you've got an IT person or you've got whoever manages your IT, ask them to do searches for like some keywords, because there's laws out there now saying that you do not get rid of anything when any kind of investigation goes on, because the company will be held liable for having discarded emails, or like you try to protect yourself by getting rid of things. So you might have your IT person do kind of a keyword search out there in their emails to see if they can pop up anything that wasn't voluntarily provided. You're looking at the notes that you've made, and a lot of times those notes are going to be typed as people are talking, but whatever method you're using to make sure that, now kind of look through and make sure that they look complete. And the notes are actually one of those things that you also consider reading through them before you let loose of one of your interviewees, just to say, here's the notes I've got. Did I miss anything? Do I have it down? Did I record it properly? Because now's your time to just get the correct stuff and to clean up, if I'm typing, it's to clean up my typos, but also to see, did I make myself an abbreviation now I can't read? But, if there's handwritten notes that somebody sent to someone else, there's those text messages. People kind of ignore the texting. They get so used to it. There may be social media postings about this. And a lot of companies now have different recording mechanisms. You know, I've got several clients who have cameras in main areas of their company and stuff like that. Maybe one of those cameras captured something that was useful for this. You kind of look at all of that stuff. And then you have to put it together and you're evaluating it. So what is it that really happened here? You're looking at plausibility, the corroboration. Did you get several people that all said the same thing that makes it, you know, strengthens what that statements were, you know, what those statements were, the consistency of it, because you're trying to figure out, does it make sense? Is there more information you need to get? And you're assessing the credibility of each of the people that you interviewed. Some will just come off more believable. Sometimes everybody will come off believable based on, you know, the way they looked when they told it to you, but not, you know, it's like everyone can't be correct if they have opposing stories. So you may have to conduct follow-up interviews. You know, we talked about this, but then with the rest of my interviewing, I came across a couple more questions I'd like to ask you. You know, and this is something to let people, you know, you've let them know when you're letting loose of the interviewee that you may be back for a follow-up question if something else comes up. Then you need to take action. So this is going to come, you know, one of the first things you're going to try to do is to end the problematic behavior. You're looking for what kind of appropriate discipline might be needed. Is there a termination in the works here? You know, is there criminal prosecution? Was this not caught soon enough to have it be merely inappropriate for the workplace, but now it's actually broken laws? And, you know, what kind of counseling, you know, maybe it is just some training or counseling for that employee. You need to, you know, right the wrong. I know that sounds, you know, idealistic, but that's really what you're trying to do within an investigation, is to make it fix the problem. And you need to, you know, protect the employees. It's safety first. So are they worried about their actual safety? You need to prevent any further harassment, if that's what it was, or those uncomfortable situations. And you need to communicate with everybody. You know, you don't quite want to do that until you figured out what the action is going to be, but then you need to let the, you know, the complainant know, here's what we're going to do. You don't go into detail. Again, you know, keep the confidentiality. Is that it may be just that we have decided on appropriate action. We're going to put him through some training. We've put some notes in his file and would like to hear if anything else happens. But, you know, or, you know, it's like you keep it as clean as you can without going in, you know, you don't want the detail, but you want the person who made the complaint know something was done. And the accused, obviously, you're going to let that person know, here's what's been decided, here's what actions we're going to take with you. And you have to let the supervisor of that person know, because they, you know, if they're involved in it or need to, if it's like training and stuff, you need to let the supervisor know this person needs to be, you know, going out for training. So I'll let you know when I've scheduled it, things like that. And obviously senior management. You need to document it. Now, writing an investigative report, if you look online, there's, you know, different things you can find. But what I've done is, because when I was getting my degree, I actually took some criminal justice courses just as my electives because it was interesting. And so I tend to write an investigative report like a police report, in the sense that it's like, it's always the alleged, you know, the alleged person, or, you know, Mr. Smith stated such and such, you know, because you always want to, you know, make sure that that you're relaying it kind of verbatim, not putting your own opinion in there. So if you can just say, you know, Sam said this, Maria said this, you know, it's just trying to write down as close as you can what they told you, not, you know, doing this because you don't want to say, oh, Sam, you know, went over here and did this over here. Well, you didn't see him do that. So that doesn't go into the written report. What you've got is Maria said Sam did this. And, you know, so you need to be objective. You need to be very specific. And you also want to describe some of the reactions, you know, put in there a little bit about what you noticed that, you know, may have seemed odd, or just were they surprised by the questions? Did they look guilty? You know, I don't know what you describe as looking guilty, but some people will, you know, just do something, when you start talking with them, and you need to be prepared to kind of document that too, because it does play a role in it. And the final step is the follow-up. You're following up with the complaining employee and accused, because I have seen too many times where the complaining employee didn't hear anything. They made the complaint, they noticed that an interview happened or something, but they never got closure. They were never told it's over, that this would happen. As far as they're concerned, they're sitting around the company saying the person they accused doing exactly what they did before, and as far as they're concerned, the company just ignored it. So you need to make sure that the complaining employee does get some closure on this. It may, like I said, it may not be the kind of action that they were hoping for, but you need to let them know that you have taken action. And, and to please, again, it's like we have made a decision, we are taking action with the employee, that you accused, and we would appreciate knowing if anything more happens. I mean, that is enough of a follow-up to at least give them some comfort that something was done. You need to then monitor the workplace. Make sure, regardless, whatever that complaint was about, what are you doing as a company now to make sure that it's not going to happen again? And you're also looking for retaliation. Employees can be it's like children in some ways. If other employees really love their workplace, or that supervisor who got accused, they can be mean when they find out that this person's been accused. There's a lot of loyalty there sometimes, and so they'll do their own little stabs, and you need to make sure, if you see any of that going on, that you put a stop to it, because again, it doesn't matter who's doing the retaliation, it is illegal, and they need to know that. They can't be doing anything that appears retaliatory. And I think one way to help avoid it is to make sure that they understand that you want those complaints. It may sound weird, but let them know you want those complaints, because it helps you make sure that there's a better workplace on the outside of it. That the people are all comfortable, and that therefore there's a reason that you encourage those complaints. And if you're being retaliatory, then those complaints may not happen. Because somebody who's retaliating against someone else and then gets in a situation where they should be making a complaint, maybe they won't be the one making a complaint, because now they know somebody else might do what they did. I know that got convoluted. But you just need to, make sure that they understand there is a good reason that you encourage complaints, and that the company wants to hear about them so they can stop the problems. And if you've got systematic workplace problems, you need to look at how to fix it. It may be that you need to do some kind of training. Maybe that you have to develop some new policies. And anytime you develop a new policy, really make sure that you have trained all employees on those policies. Make sure they understand the reason you have a policy and what that policy is and how you expect them to act going forward. It's important to be able to stop this stuff. And ideally, you've got people comfortable enough to come to the company with a little problem, so you can just, as I said, nip it in the bud. It may just take a conversation. Somebody told me that you were making comments like this, and it's really inappropriate in the workplace. I need you to stop. That may be something that you do a conversation, you write it up just for the file to know, to note that you've had the conversation, and then keep an eye on it. That may be all it took to take care of this. But the faster you get those complaints and the smaller they are when you get them, the easier it is to deal with it and be done with it, and not end up with the full-blown investigation that everybody worries about. But you do need to check into anything that you're hearing about, or that your supervisors mention they've seen. And the supervisors and managers out there are the ones that truly need to be trained on how to be your ears and eyes. They can't brush it off. I've got a couple of minutes, so I'll tell you one story, because I'm at the end, so we're done. But this was years ago. An attorney told me this, that he had a case that went to court and ended up very bad for the company, because the situation was, there was a marketing manager in her office, one day. Her door was partially open, but she was just working away. And two female sales reps were out in the hall. And they were talking about this one male sales rep who was constantly hitting on all the females. And it was just like, kind of the roll your eye thing. It's like, oh yeah, he just doesn't stop. He's constantly hitting on you every time you talk with him. The marketing manager ignored it. She heard it, but she ignored it. 3 months later, there's a national sales meeting where all the sales reps are together. And now the company receives a complaint of rape. One female sales rep is now saying that this same male sales rep raped her. So now they're doing an investigation, and during the investigation, it comes up that this marketing manager overheard this comment. And so instead of this male sales rep being talked with or terminated or whatever would have been appropriate at the time, depending on what the investigation played out, it was ignored. So when this made it to court, the judge, the jury looked very badly on the company. And it always goes bad for the company if they hear that a lot of time went past from when the company could have heard about it, and then nothing happened. Because whatever then ended up in court was much more serious than whatever happened way back when it was ignored. So it really makes a difference on training people on your policies, making them understand what's inappropriate in the workplace. Take it outside of work if you're going to have those kind of conversations, or jokes or something like that, to where people have the choice of leaving. Okay, that's the end of my little talk here.
Okay.
So did we get any other questions?
We do have a question, a really good one. So what happens if a union representative of the employee being investigated asks to review the investigation findings? Is there a legal obligation in place for HR to keep these findings confidential?
Well, okay, for the most part, yes, there is, because that's one reason, one very good reason you always want to conduct your investigation under the auspice of a law firm, because it protects what you find. There's the client attorney privilege, which even I believe a union cannot get into. And so it's one very good reason to at least let the attorney know this is happening. And, and they'll want to be copied on any emails and stuff like that. They'll want to review, the final report, but you want to welcome that because you want it to remain confidential and for you to be able to keep it confidential. As far as I know, there's probably some union contracts that go into a lot of detail on this type of stuff, but I think you'd want to talk with an attorney definitely before you ever even considered turning over any of the information to a union rep.
Perfect. Thank you, CJ. And thank you all for attending today's webinar presented by Heffernan. We will send information by email with instructions on how to access a copy of the presentation on our website. And thank you, CJ Westrick, for your time and expertise today. We hope all of the attendees found today's webinar to be a valuable use of your time. And be sure to join us on April 21st for an OSHA update. Thank you, everyone, and have a safe day.
Thanks. Take care.